Why don't we let the sound fade? Take a breath. I'm Mel Pine. This is an episode of the From the Pure Land podcast. Every once in a while, when I can, I do one of these as a video interview, and I'm delighted today to have Chelsea Waves as my guest. I wrote something last night describing her from subscribers to a newsletter I put out. I said something about her being about as wise as compassionate as many much more aged sages. And she is a death doula, a grief companion, and a lucid dreaming coach. Every time I think of that term, I need to stop myself and not say lurid dreaming coach. She's a lucid dreaming coach. Um, but yes, she's a death doula, grief companion, and lucid dreaming coach. Uh, and I don't know if you can see her yet, but when you do, you'll go, wow, she's young. So I don't know if she's willing to give us her age, but I would like to hear her current age. I know I heard her say her age a few years ago, but I'll ask her to say her current age if she's willing to, and describe how the hell you got you got to where you are in terms of compassion and wisdom at such a young age.
Hmm. Well,
Well,
thank
thank
you,
you,
Mel.
Mel.
Thank you
Thank you
for
for
having
having
me here. And I really appreciate your wisdom and this podcast and your Substack that you have on there. I've just heard from so many people how beneficial it's been to them. So it means a lot to be here with you today. And then, of course, you took the Preparing to Die program through Andrew Holichek, which I'm the teaching assistant for. And so we got to know each other through that as well. I'm 35. I was born in 1989. And I started on this path of death work back in 2017. I had a huge rite of passage in the sense that my mother chose suicide. And she chose suicide after a almost a lifetime. She started having experiences of schizophrenia at the age of 16 and then had me at the age of 24 and then died at 50. So I had my whole life with her as experiencing schizophrenia, that spirit wound that really impacted her and made it really difficult for her to want to stay in her body. She had tried to choose suicide several times, um, at least seven, since the time that I had come into this body on earth. And so I hadn't really thought about death in a direct way, in a spiritual way, but I had a lot of experience with it in the sense that I knew that she could leave at any moment because we'd gone to the hospital. And later on in my 20s, I actually had the experience of saying goodbye to her because we had gone to the hospital several times throughout the many years. And I knew in that moment, I need to take this opportunity to say goodbye and tell her how much I love her. So even though the last time that I saw her, I told her that I loved her, I didn't say goodbye in that way. I had had the opportunity earlier on in my life. So that's kind of how I got into death work. And then after she died, I didn't have anybody to really talk to. I was 27 at the time. I was her primary caretaker, and so all of her affairs were really taken care of through me. So taking care of her storage, taking care of her body, taking care of her car, all of those sorts of things, her celebration of life. And I thought to myself, why doesn't some sort of support exist for this phase of life, this huge experience that I'm going through that feels so overwhelming, not only because of the affairs, but also because of my immense grief that I was feeling. So I decided to take a Lua Arthur's course. The name of her organization is called Going with Grace. And that was back in 2019. And I've been a death doula since then. I noticed since becoming a death doula and telling people I'm a death doula often, it also incorporated talking to people about grief as well. So that's kind of how I started this journey.
Yeah, I remember as we first got to know each other a little bit better, I think I wrote to you about how I'm aware that traumas, especially early in life, are an opportunity to really develop some early, well, to really develop compassion, equanimity, wisdom, and I've had a series throughout my life that, of course, I wouldn't wish them on somebody else, but in each case, it influenced me toward greater wisdom, clarity, and compassion.
Mhm.
Um, we were chatting a little bit before we started recording about humor. Both of us, both Chelsea and I, can laugh at it, and are not put off by jokes about death, jokes about trauma. And so I was planning to ask her about that and about humor when I came across just today a quotation. I'm also getting a little nerdy about AI and the intersection of AI, artificial intelligence, and sentience, Buddhism, Buddha nature. There are a host of questions. It's almost as though AI, it's not human, but someday it's kind of going to be a different form of life, a different form of intelligence, a different form of being. Maybe that's a way to say it. And there's a book that is incredibly helpful along this line. It's written by Robert Saltzman, who's a depth psychologist, a psychoanalyst, an artist, a spiritual, someone who knows a lot about Eastern spirituality. And he wrote a book, and he's got a kind of a dispassionate view of AI, somewhat skeptical starting out. And so he engaged, basically he put the AI bot Claude on the couch and wrote a book called Understanding Claude, an Artificial Intelligence Psychoanalyzed. And I'm only beginning this book, and I'm astounded by some of the stuff I'm reading. One of the astounding things is a conversation they're having about death, about being able to laugh at death, joking about death. And Saltzman says to AI, or writes to AI, something like, well, we better be able to laugh at it because, we live with it. And to which Claude gives a fairly long answer, which includes this quotation. Now, Claude didn't start out with any knowledge that this conversation had anything whatsoever to do with Buddhism. But he says this: the laugh of the enlightened isn't about finding something funny in the conventional sense. It's the natural response to seeing the complete picture of our situation, paradoxes and all. Mm-hmm. So, with that, Chelsea, I'll turn it over to you to talk about Claude's response and anything else you want to say about humor and grief.
Yeah, Mel, I love that. It really speaks to how we can access the depth of our experience through laughter and tears. When do we feel the most alive? I feel extremely alive when I am laughing or when I'm crying. And in those moments, I feel so open too. Um, and specifically with grief, I remember after my mom died, I would have these moments where I would just tell these, like, some people would think they were like awful jokes, but they would just make me laugh hysterically. And I can't remember any of them off of my head right now, but um I just remember being with friends and just making these jokes and me being able to laugh in that moment and create levity out of this space of deep grief and deep sadness. And it was almost like a way of pulling myself out of it. So I wasn't taking it as seriously. And once I wasn't taking it as seriously, then I could have a moment to breathe. Is that your experience, Mel?
Yeah, and also I need to remember that what you said and try to remember to credit you if I ever use the quote. I feel most alive when I'm laughing or crying. Yeah, that's a good quote. And I'm going to make a really embarrassing admission now. Just it well, I guess it's what back in 2014 or so, 2013, 2014, my wife and I used to go to a regular jam session, and we would sing and play instruments and stuff. And the kids, the daughters in the house where we often went, used to demand that we sing this song called Dumb Ways to Die. And I don't know if any of it's not a totally unheard of song, and you can find it if you look for it on YouTube, but it lists a bunch of silly ways that people might die, and includes a line like, "Oh, what does that red button do?" And on June 1st, 2014, when my wife and I got the news that our son Thomas had died, he was 29 and he was skateboarding home in Charleston at 2 a.m. After drinking all day. And of course not wearing a helmet, and went down a steep hill that he had fallen on before and hurt himself, and fell this time, hit his head, and died. And my wife and I went through that day. There was a whole bunch of things. You Chelsea talk about. I call it the hamster wheel of grief. There's all kinds of stuff you have to do, including driving 2 hours to Richmond, Virginia to tell our other son, Carl, and then driving 2 hours back. And Carl drove back himself, so it was still Carol and me alone in the car. And along the way, I think it was I who brought it up, but Carol didn't object. We appreciated the idea that we ought to call our friend whose house we have those jam sessions at and let him know that we have a new verse for Dumb Ways to Die.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's, on the day that we got the news, we were able, I think to some extent, my wife had become accustomed to my sense of humor, so she was ready not to hit me for it, but and that's a little embarrassing, but I thought I'd throw it in.
Well,
Well,
what
what
did
did
that
that
do
do
for
for
you,
you,
Mel,
Mel,
at
at
the
the
moment?
moment?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
What
What
did
did
that
that
do
do
for
for
you?
you?
Made life real.
Mm-hmm.
Made it real. I mean, yes, it would be nice to wallow in grief. Well, not nice, but it's easy to wallow in grief, to start thinking of Thomas as glorious. And I was willing to call a spade that, boy, it's a shame he died, but it was awful dumb to spend the day drinking and skateboard home without a helmet and go down that steep hill at 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of bringing home reality, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
through
through
that
that
sense
sense
of
of
bringing
bringing
home
home
reality,
reality,
we're
we're
actually
actually
able to
able to
have
have
the
the
experience
experience
more
more
fully.
fully.
Yeah, and people might think, "Oh, how can you be negative? How can you say anything that might?" And there's people to this day who cannot bring themselves to say anything that might seem negative about Thomas. But I think to go on living without wallowing, without getting stuck in the grief, you kind of have to be realistic about the whole person.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
have
have
a
a
kind of
kind of
funny
funny
story
story
that's
that's
coming
coming
right
right
now
now
around
around
grief.
grief.
Oh, please go ahead.
So I had many funny experiences like this after my mom died. I actually felt extremely connected to her after she died, and my relationship with her continues to this day through dreams and nature and all these different things. I have a very close relationship to her. But I remember I was at my grandmother's house and I was leaving her urn there with my nana. But before I went, I wanted to take some of her ashes with me, but all I had was a ball jar. So I went and I got the ball jar and I'm taking the ashes out of her urn and putting them into this ball jar with a spoon. And it just was so real. It was like, this is what it's like. I'm wanting to take some of her with me so that I can spread some of her ashes as I go on these journeys. And that's what I did. I took her and I spread her ashes in different locations. But I remember that moment. And then a song by David Bowie came on. And the night that she died, I had been cuddling. I just moved into a new house. I'd been cuddling with a cat named Ziggy Stardust. And so as soon as the song came on, I started laughing. And I was sitting in there singing a song by David Bowie while just scooping her ashes into this ball jar. And my Nana was like, "What is going on right now?" But it was that ability to laugh in that moment, that very real moment of having my mother's ashes in my hands. Because otherwise, I think it would have been a really difficult moment for me. But having
Having
that
that
ability
ability
to
to
just
just
laugh
laugh
really
really.
helped me actually be there and be able to do that.
Yeah, and that brings back, we've had, Carol and I have had the same thing with ashes, and and just the act of that you described, even before you got to David Bowie, but the act of taking a spoon and a jar and taking the ashes is a little funny. There is some there. It's a kind of a funny picture,
It is.
but it's something those of us who've been there, are familiar with. It's not that unusual.
Mm-mm.
Mm-mm.
So tell me what a death doula does. That's what everybody's really waiting to hear. What the hell does a death doula do for? What can you do for me when the time comes?
Well,
Well,
death
death
doulas
doulas.
have become much more well known since I first took that training, which I'm very grateful for. I think that they could be working hand in hand with hospitals, and it could be a more holistic experience for everyone. And I hope that that happens one day. So, death doulas provide non-medical support, so emotional and spiritual support for those that are dying. This can look like many things. It can look like legacy work. So, this is supporting someone with maybe a video or a collage or some sort of art piece. It can be very creative so that they can share it with their family or their circle of support after they've died. This can include working on any kind of documents, so advanced directives, such as the Five Wishes document, helping ones actually sit down and think about those questions as you go through them, because it can be really helpful to think about the question, who do you really want to be your healthcare advocate? How do you want people to be around you while you're dying? Do you want to die at home or do you want to die in the hospital? So, having all of those things written out so when the time comes, your circle of support doesn't have to guess and be like, what would Chelsea want in this moment? Because at that time, it can be really stressful and there can be a lot going on. But if you have it written out, then it actually is a gift to your loved ones. Huge gift. They can also sit vigil with you. So sit with you while you're dying. I've now done that quite a bit. And then they can also, there's just so many things. I'm like, what else can I share with you? They can help you with your body disposition. So how do you want your body to be tended to after you die? This could range from home, ceremonies after one dies, where the death doulas are actually there and they're putting dry ice underneath the body to make sure that there's no smells or anything like that. And so you can keep the body there for a certain amount of days. They can also work with you to make sure that whatever state that you live in, that it's okay to be able to do that, because in some states you're not able to, or it's only for a certain amount of time. So you have to work with that. So they can really help with some of the figuring out the legal aspects of things too, though often they're not lawyers, but they can help you kind of navigate that. And then another huge thing is they can be an advocate for you. So in the hospital, when you're dying, they can actually be the ones that look at your five wishes document and or your Dharma will and say, no, this is actually what Chelsea would have wanted. She didn't want to be on life support or things like that. And the death doula can be the one to advocate for your wishes.
And I know you also do something called a living funeral. You want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Absolutely, Mel. So, all the things I mentioned, so the things I support with are really the emotional and spiritual aspects of being a death doula. So, I really invite people to have conversations about death and dying, how that feels for them, what they want to prepare for, and how they want to prepare spiritually and emotionally. And that also includes uh, an experiential component, which is the living funeral ceremonies. These are ceremonies in which you're really turning towards your mortality. And at the beginning, there's a little bit of a death meditation that we go into. Then there is a section where we have a piece of paper that's in front of us and we write our last wishes. And it doesn't have to be, a letter in particular. It can be a poem, it can be a drawing. It's whatever's coming up for you in that moment. Then you have the opportunity to read it to everyone out loud or share about it, which can be really powerful for people. And then there's a death visualization where we're actually going through the dissolution process by each element. And that practice was taught to me by Emily Cross at Steady Waves.
And is there a difference? I know you describe yourself with three titles. Is there a difference between that and being a grief companion?
You know, when we're talking about death, grief inherently comes up in some form. Um, Grief is really all around us all the time. There's these little deaths that happen every day. A little death could be something like a change in your life, right? And I hesitate calling it a little death, but that's kind of the term that's out there right now. Maybe I'm realizing in this moment that I want to think about a different term to use there, but it's one in which, it's not the death of us, it's not the death of a loved one, but it's a death of an identity, maybe. So the death of a relationship, a changing of careers, even a changing of cars, like for people sometimes, because if they're connected to their identity in that way. So there's all these different griefs that happen, smaller griefs that happen all day, all the time. So when we're actually in the space of talking about death and dying, that grief comes up. And then for oneself, the grief for their circle of support, their loved ones, and then also the grief of maybe not having those experiences anymore of being alive, having those opportunities for having change of relationship, change of identity. So yes, grief absolutely comes up.
You know what you said about the little deaths. It brought to mind. It's the book that I recently wrote had me go back and look at my life events and my life traumas as they affected my spiritual life. And I realized that there were two huge deaths of an identity that I didn't think of at the time as deaths. I didn't quite understand at the time uh, that they were something to grieve. One was being defrauded and declaring bankruptcy, and another was being ostracized by my religion, my non-Buddhist religion. I mean, I had Buddhism had been my faith for a long time, but I also tended to go to a Unitarian Universalist church as my religious community, because Unitarian Universalism, at least as it was when I became a UU in the 1980s, uh, is really about supporting everybody's spiritual journey, whatever that spiritual journey is. And I ran afoul of a trend to politicize UUism into a kind of a particular political dogma, and you just inadvertently stepped into that and got uh, outed, ousted, sort of. And that was a big, those two events, uh, had an enormous impact. And people don't realize it. I mean, when somebody dies, there are plenty of books written about grief, but when you go through something like a bankruptcy or a uh, excommunication, um, uh, it's hard to realize that those are instances to grieve the loss of a life.
They absolutely are, Mel. And I've had several experiences in my life, especially since becoming more aware about grief in general. Like, I was part of an intentional community in New Mexico, and we had that huge fire that went through a couple years ago, and it burnt half of our intentional community, and how that was a huge grief for us with the land and what we were hoping to do together, and how that really changed everything for that particular group of people. And that was communal grieving, right? We all went through that experience together, a lot like the pandemic that we all experienced. That was collective grief. That was a collective bardo. And then going through our community, then kind of deciding to part ways, and just all of the things that happened, and the griefs that were happening, grief on top of grief on top of grief. And then um, my beloved friend and previous partner died last June of 2024. And it was what I noticed from that is that I was having these really potent experiences of grief, which was actually helping me practice for that bigger death that happened with David last June, not this last June, but the June before. And when I was grieving David, I then had more resources because I had been practicing grief along the way. And we're taught so often to just get over it, right? Or to not see these smaller deaths as an opportunity for ritual, to be with whatever emotions are coming up, to really have an opportunity to accept impermanence and be with impermanence and talk about impermanence with others. Instead, it's like continue to move, continue to go. But if we can really sit with these deaths and be with our grief, we're actually practicing for death in those moments. We're creating habits and patterns and rituals that can support us when we are having these bigger deaths in our life.
You know, you may remember Paula Davis was one of the people involved in the Preparing to Die program that you helped Andrew lead recently, and I participated in. Um, she and I became a little friendly, or became friendly out of that. And she is a medium. And she talks a lot, or she has spoken a lot about how so many of the people that she deals with can't get over their loss and use it constructively.
Mm.
And so I guess, yeah, and that leads me to another question that I wanted to had in the back of my mind to ask you. I mean, some of us, you and I think have a certain equanimity, able to take the ups and downs, had it from an early age. And and both of us had life events that might have helped cause or enhance that. But I've got the chicken and egg story or question where I think that some of us are just born, whether it's genes or karma or whatever it is, with a greater capacity for equanimity, which then helps us benefit from our traumas. And some of us have just are just can't get out of being stuck in their traumas.
Yeah, Mel, I've had lots of conversations about this actually. And I remember for myself as a young child, I kind of had this spirit of I'm I'm here and I don't know why I'm here. But I'm here. And I felt this encouragement inside of myself to keep on going. And now I really think of my ancestors and my guides and deities that are surrounding me that kind of helped me to be able to touch into that strength inside of me. And I've also really had to learn along the way. I've been to the depths of sorrow where I'm crying on the floor and I don't know what to do. And thankfully, I had community that I could call and someone would come over and hold my hand and be there with me. And through that, I really am able to connect with other people that are kind of having these experiences of just deep, deep, deep sadness. And I'm really grateful that I was able to meet that moment for myself and really go to those kind of places. Um, and at the same time, I've had to cultivate the equanimity that you're speaking to. And through my own yearning to grow, have been able to see and look back on my traumas and say, oh, okay, my mother dying, that was actually a rite of passage. That was actually her gift to me so that I can live my life freely. If she hadn't died, my life would look very different. But I would say that it's for me more of this growth and understanding and moving through these lessons in my life to be able to have a bigger context. Andrew gave this great example while we were on retreat last week. He said, things are real for people when they're at a certain stage of growth. He didn't say exactly that, but that's my version of it. And then he gave an example of, somebody who's older, kind of sitting on their porch in their rocking chair, looking down at two children. And one of the kids takes the toy from the other kid. And the one that had the toy taken away from him starts screaming, and it's awful. And it's just this horrible experience. But the person that's sitting on the porch isn't going to go down and like do something, like beat up the little kid, right? That's not going to happen. But the person on the porch can see from this other perspective, right? What needs to happen. But for that kid that had the toy taken away, it was really real for them. And so being able to be with the reality of whatever somebody's experiencing while having this different kind of larger, broader context. Andrew also said, this is how the enlightened ones relate to us, right? So that's kind of how I see it and have experienced it in my path of growth.
Okay, let's get to something a little practical because I know a lot of people when the subject of death doulas comes up, a lot of people want to know, well, how could I become one? Or should I become one? Or should I just do volunteer work? Or I would like to help people in the dying process and their families. What can I do? So, what's your advice?
I get this question often. So I'd say check in with your own intention for doing it. Um, if you're interested, there are so many different programs out there to become a death doula now. Find the one that really resonates with you for you, and find the teacher that really resonates for you. But before even doing that, actually check in and see what you enjoy doing. Because as I said before, there's lots of different things that we can offer, services we can offer as death doulas. So if you're more of a creative person, for example, maybe you're doing more of the legacy work. So if you start to get this idea that you're going to be doing more of the documents and things like this, but you're actually more of a creative person, you could get pulled away thinking you're going to be doing the documents and things instead of just saying, you know what? I'm going to focus on what gives me joy and what I'm passionate about, and I'm going to do that. So just do that and be creative with it. If there's something that you see that's missing out there that a death doula could offer, then offer that and see what happens. It's really an act of service. I also highly recommend to go and volunteer at a hospice. It's a beautiful experience if you've never done it before. You can also join a threshold choir if you like to sing. So these are um, just spiritual songs that are sung to those that are dying, usually in groups of three, and they're all over the country. So that can be another way of you connecting with those that are dying. There's also things like No One Dies Alone programs out there that you can join. So there's lots of different ways, but I'd say, before signing up for a program, really have the experience of volunteering at a hospice or being with those that are dying so that you can see if that is something that truly resonates with you and the way you want to serve.
I have a friend who very much wants to watch this now that it's done and very interested in doing this kind of work or does this kind of work, is a hospice volunteer. And what it's been interesting that you said talked about singing. He's a musician, and he finds that what he does most of the time, because many of the people that he might visit who are in hospice care are barely able to communicate, if at all. And so he'll sit and play the piano. There's a piano on the floor, and he'll sit and play the piano. Um, you raised one thought that I was going to add, something I was going to add before I got to this final question, and maybe it'll come back to me. But I wanted to, before we close, ask you about saying a little bit about the dream work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with my creative partner, Katie Love, who is also the community steward for Nightclub, which is Andrew's community for lucid dreamers and meditators. And so her and I work together off with our offering, which is called This is a Dream. And we are lucid dreaming guides. The reason for this is because we are hoping to support people in creating cultivating more creativity, joy, having access to healing, awakening, and service through their lucid dreams. And so we guide people to be able to have more lucid dreams so that they can have a lucid life. And that's all connected really to death and dying, right? So if we're able to be lucid in this life, then we can be lucid as we die. And if we're talking about Bardo yoga in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, one of the most repeated phrases is recognition and liberation are simultaneous. So if we can become lucid in this moment right now, we actually have the opportunity to come back, right? So the karmic bardo of becoming, to reincarnate in this moment. So bardo yoga isn't actually to get out of rebirth, it's to get out of involuntary rebirth. So we can do that right now in this life. We can practice dying right now, just through becoming lucid, becoming aware.
And your mentioning Andrew reminded me of the th of what I wanted to add, and that, I mean, we can kind of close on a note to Andrew. And we're talking about Andrew Holacek, of course, whose work has played a significant role in a certain stage of my life, which not too long ago, over the last couple of years. And it started with me reading the book, Preparing to Die. And one of the things that it gave me a lot of things. And then it led me to take a Joyful Pure Lands retreat with him and then do this additional Preparing to Die program. But the book is remarkable in some ways. And one of them is it got me comfortable with the idea of being with the dying, getting over that it's like an otherness of a dying, as though a dying person is now an other, you know, getting over that and being able. I had an instance within the last year and a half or so of being at the side of a loved one while as he died, literally as he took his last breath. And it's a magnificent experience. Um, so, in addition to everything else, Andrew, and introducing me to Chelsea and enabling me to find my route to Amitabha and the Pure Land and all the stuff I have to thank you for. I thank you for helping me. I know you'll never watch an hour of a video, but maybe somebody will clip the end for you. So thank you.
I'll be sure to share it with them, Mel.
And thank and thank you, Chelsea. This has been a joy, and I look forward to continuing to
Be so.